Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney, retired. None of what follows is legal advice. I'm here to do some video for you today to talk about an interesting subject on the law, and here it is. Do you ever watch the body camera videos here on YouTube? They are a hoot to watch. Not just the sovereign citizen idiots who really can't be helped. I mean, there's not that those people don't know anything and they know it so well that no one can convince them otherwise. I'm talking about just regular people sometimes, and of course the occasional felon who just completely fails to understand what the police can and will do to you when you don't cooperate. And that's because they believe they know their rights. Now, they probably watched every episode of LA Law, Matlock, Law and Order, and pretty much any other crime show that you can think of, and so they know exactly what goes into the criminal justice system. Except, in reality, they don't. Now, I'm not talking about serious criminals like Charlie Adelson or Sarah Boone or some of these other folks that we've seen trials, Crazy Daryl up there in Waukesha who ran over the people, Daryl Brooks. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about your average nitwit driving a car who doesn't understand what the police can do when they stop you. I have always maintained and I have always advised clients that if they are stopped by the police, there's only one way to handle it. It's yes, sir, no, sir, I don't know, sir. For example, when the police officer says, "Do you know why I stopped you?"
I see your driver's license, please. Well, I'm Deputy Slope. I work for the Pinal County Sheriff's Office Traffic Unit. Have any idea why I might have stopped you?
The answer is, I have no idea, sir. Because if you say, "Yeah, I think I was speeding,"
You kind of in a rush and driving fast?
congratulations, you've just made an admission that is going to be admitted against you in court. You've just admitted that you've broken the law. So the proper answer is always, "I don't know." If the question is, "May I see your driver's license, insurance paperwork, and vehicle registration?"
May I see registration paperwork or proof of insurance?
The answer is always, "Yes, sir. Let me get that for you right away." Several nights ago, I watched a video on a woman who was pulled over by deputies for speeding. She was going 53 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. She rolled down her window about 1 inch, broke out her iPhone, and started to film the police and demanded to see the radar where she had been stopped or where she had been clocked at 53. And they told her, "We don't have to show that to you." And at that point, she wouldn't talk to them. She wouldn't answer her questions. They kept asking her for her ID, and she just kept saying, "Nope, you pulled me over for no reason. There's absolutely no reason for this traffic stop. You're doing this wrong." And, to a certain extent, I get it, right? Perhaps the people who were in front of her, which is what you want to know why they weren't stopped, perhaps they might also have been speeding. That might very well be a good question to raise in court. And in fact, in court, you can get that dash camera footage through discovery. And hopefully that's what they would do. Because if indeed there were people in front of her, then the question of why she was singled out becomes important. I would also add she was an African American woman, and from a standpoint of the George Floyd era, I would strongly suspect she believes she was pulled over for a DWB, or in other words, driving while black. The problem with asking for that kind of stuff at the roadside is that you're not entitled to an answer. You can ask the cop anything, but they don't have to answer. The officer is entitled to see your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and your insurance paperwork, because there are laws that say he can get those things. He doesn't have to answer your questions, but then again, you don't have to answer any of his, except here's the driver's license, here's your insurance paperwork, and here's the registration. Now, if you indeed treat an officer rudely, or you obstruct him in his or her in his or her investigation, then there is a pretty good chance you're going to be asked to step out of the car. And one of the reasons that they ask you to step out of the car is because if you get rude and nasty, they might think you have a gun or a knife or something else in the car that could hurt them. So Pennsylvania versus Mims, which is a Supreme Court case, decided that when a police officer asks you to get out of the car for purposes of officer safety, you have to get out of your car. That's a lawful police command. If the police ask you to get out of your car, you have to get out of your car. There isn't any one weird trick you can employ to get out of that. Sorry, I know that makes some people angry, but that's the law. I didn't write it. I might even have written something different if it had been me, but the law is what the law is, and that's what would be enforced in a court of law. In the video that I saw, the woman continued to talk to them through the window and she refused to produce her driver's license or any other requested information. She kept asking for a supervisor. They kept telling her they had asked a supervisor to come, but they really needed to see her driver's license and she refused. Now, here's the funny part of that. She hands them her driver's license, she gets a speeding ticket, zip, she's on her way. But she wanted a confrontation and they were happy to give her one. So she continued to film, and the police officers availed themselves of other remedies. Police officers have a number of remedies that are available to them when people are obstreperous. One of them is to tow the car, and that's exactly what they did. Now, of course, in order to tow the car, they have to get the driver out of the car. So they asked the very nice lady if she would get out of the car, and she said she was waiting for the supervisor. And they told her that the supervisor was coming, but she had to get out of her car because it was being towed. And they warned her 3 times that if she didn't get out, they were going to bust the window and drag her out.
I'm telling you one more time. Step out of the vehicle or I'm going to break the window. Okay.
And when she refused to get out of the vehicle or provide any other information, that's exactly what they did. And at that point in time, you might guess what happened. They quickly employed this window breaker. They drag her out. They unlock the vehicle. And at that point, she starts wailing and gnashing her teeth and generally acting like a spoiled 3-year-old because she didn't get what she wanted, that supervisor who would get into a nice confrontation with her. Instead, she got cuffed. They put her in the back seat of the cruiser, and sure enough, the supervisor showed up and said, "Yeah, you were kind of an idiot. This didn't have to go this way. You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to go to jail, but now you're going to jail because you didn't know your rights. Yes, you have a right to remain silent, and it might be a darn good idea if you started using it right now." This is the danger with learning what your legal rights are through television. Television, being drama, is not limited to the real world. They can invent legal rights. They can do all number of things in the name of fiction. And they do these things to make life interesting and enjoyable for the viewers. They don't make it as a template for people to exercise their rights or disobey the law. But unfortunately, sometimes that happens. Now, the very nice lady was just quite simply uninformed and didn't understand her rights, but she wasn't really a criminal. She didn't have any drugs or paraphernalia. She was an executive with a rental car company who was out looking for one of her vehicles that had been stolen. She didn't have any alcohol in her car. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't doing anything other than speeding, which I suppose made her arrest for obstructing a police officer that much more painful. Sometimes, however, there are people who believe that they know what the Constitution says when they really do not. For example, there are those who are going to tell the police officer that he needs a search warrant to search their car. And in some cases, that's actually true. If, for example, the police roll up on you and you've been speeding and they don't have anything that raises any suspicion, for example, a dead body in the back seat with stab wounds, a big marijuana plant sitting in the planter in the back of your car, syringes next to packets marked heroin, things like that, in most cases, they probably do require a search warrant. Unless, of course, you give them consent, which you should absolutely never do. You never want to give consent. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, you can do things that will cause reasonable suspicion, which was previously absent, to arise. For example, like the lady I quoted before, she refused to produce a driver's license. Maybe you have a driver's license that's out of date. Maybe you have a driver's license from out of state, and maybe you have expired tags on your car or no tags on your car. and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and there's been a burglary down the street and they can see a crowbar in your back seat. All of those kinds of things might very well give rise to both reasonable suspicion and, most of the time, probable cause to create a search. You see, here's what the Fourth Amendment actually says: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. Now, there's some interesting language there. In the very first sentence, the framers specify that it isn't all searches that are banned, only unreasonable searches and seizures. They note that warrants shall issue, but only upon probable cause and made by someone under oath, particularly describing the place to be searched and things to be seized. So, certain things at a traffic stop make a search reasonable. For example, the odor of marijuana in those jurisdictions where it's still unlawful. For example, certain actions by individuals, like walking back and forth in front of a store and looking around furtively, particularly at 2 o'clock in the morning when the lights are out, that might cause reasonable suspicion. And upon reasonable suspicion, that creates a reasonable need for a search. That's what's called a Terry stop. And there's a huge body of law that has come up around that, the huge body of law that's come up around traffic stops. And all of these things basically tell you that in most cases, if a cop has reasonable suspicion, he can do a Terry stop. And if he has probable cause, he can search your car. And unfortunately, for most people who smoke marijuana, they don't understand that that smell stays with them. It gets on their clothes, it gets in the fabric of the vehicle. And guess what? When that happens and the cops smell it, they can search your car. And they're going to every time. Now, can they go back and get a warrant? Certainly they can if they think this could be a huge bust. But most of the time, they're just going to get people out of the vehicle, look through it, and if they don't find anything that's unlawful, then you're going to be on your way with an apology. But because a lot of times people transport things that are illicit substances in their vehicle, a police officer will probably have probable cause to perform a search on a vehicle when in most cases it's going to be held up in court. Another thing that cracks me up about people who do not understand their rights is the idea that if a police officer places you under arrest, he must immediately read you your rights. The only reason he would need to read you your rights is if he sought to question you. If he wants to ask questions that go directly to a legal violation, in other words, not your name or address, something like that when you're in custody, meaning you're not free to leave or your freedom is restrained by either cuffs or by being told that you are not free to leave, then you have a right to have your Miranda rights read to you. If they're going to ask you questions, they absolutely have to Mirandize you. But if they're just going to haul you to jail and let the judge figure it out, then all they have to do is put you in the back of the black and white taxi and take you downtown to the jail. They don't have to read you your rights, and they don't have to read you your rights unless and until they decide to question you. As I've witnessed in a number of bad videos here on YouTube, there is a large block of people out there who clearly do not understand this concept. Many times, ignorance of this concept creates a real problem for people. For example, the person who commits a crime and then believes the cops have to read him his rights because they've arrested him. Instead, they put him in the back of the patrol car, which has a video camera, which is recording everything that he says. And of course, all of that will be used against him in a court of law later on. And then he says something like, "Boy, I hope they never find where I stashed that dope." Well, people do things like that because they don't realize there are cameras in the back of patrol cars. And it's not a violation of Miranda if you volunteer that information before your rights are read. So if you think you're protected by Miranda and you haven't been given your Miranda rights and you haven't been put in custody and you volunteer that, yeah, you killed that guy, but now you can't prove it because you didn't Mirandize me, well, guess what? You're probably going to jail for the rest of your life. And remember, it's only custodial interrogation that allows you to receive the Miranda warning. If you're simply standing by the side of the road talking to the cop and he asks you if you were speeding and you say, "Yeah, I was speeding," and then he says, "Well, why were you weaving from side to side?" and you say, "Well, because I'm drunk," both of those admissions are coming in a court. And if you say, what about Miranda? They're going to say, well, you weren't under custody until you made those statements, and now you're no longer free to leave. So Miranda doesn't apply. And again, that's true even if you really weren't free at that point because they had not arrested you or handcuffed you, but they were planning to. If you didn't ask if you were free to leave, that's on you. While the constitutional law on search and seizure, Fourth and Fifth Amendment issues is fairly well developed nationally, how it is applied in the different states and how it's modified by a state's own constitutional provisions makes a complete list of all the different rights available to someone hard to come by. Suffice it to say that you should read your state constitution as well as your federal constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, Amendments 1 through 10. If you have questions about those rights, see a lawyer in your jurisdiction. Because the law is applied differently in every state and the processes are somewhat different in every state, nobody on YouTube should ever be relied upon to give you advice on searches and seizures. If you have an issue and you're stopped and you believe you're going to be searched, you should have a right to call your lawyer before that happens. But if you don't get a chance to call him before that happens, make sure that's documented and make sure you asked. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I've made these so that you'd have something to watch while I'm off down in the Panama Canal Zone. I hope you've had a great day and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave any comments down below. Like, share, subscribe. You can email me at the address above, but I'm probably not going to see it for a few days. Thanks again for being here. Have a marvelous day and come on back tomorrow. We'll talk about something else that I'm sure you'll find interesting and maybe entertaining. Hey, as I said at the beginning, none of what I said is legal advice, but let me tell you what, the stuff that's going to be right up here, these are the things that YouTube thinks you might be interested in going forward. Have a terrific day.